Hey guys, Triple D Cat here, recording for the Zombie Arcade, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about 2012 in terms of what happened with gaming in 2012, which was of course last year. You may recall that early last year, around this time, I made a video where I discussed my top 5 favorite games of 2011. This year I'm not doing that. That was sort of a celebration for me of what the year had brought in gaming. What a wonderful bounty of games we had received. And this year, there were a few really good titles, and some other things that maybe weren't that good, but that I enjoyed a lot nonetheless. But overall, 2012 has been a year for me that's been a disappointing year overall to be a gamer, and there weren't that many games that really made me feel the deep, warm passion about gaming that I have felt in previous years. I felt like most of the major releases in 2012 were disappointments, and the year was saved by some strong sleeper hits, some strong indie games that we maybe didn't expect, and a few other things towards the end of the year that maybe don't quite qualify as either of those, but were nonetheless a little bit surprising and unexpected. But many of the games this year that A, were critically lauded, and B, were, I felt, some of the sort of better, highly produced AAA games of the year, were very disappointing for me, to the point where you guys might have noticed I haven't made that many videos lately, particularly in the second half of 2012, and a big part of that's been to do with the fact that for me, the release schedule has been so lackluster that it's made me not feel super excited about gaming in general, you know, and that's not cool. But before I get into talking about what disappointed me a lot this year, I wanted to bring attention to some games that were surprisingly really fucking dope, or that I really enjoyed. So the games that probably my favorite game this year was XCOM: Enemy Unknown, which was a surprise. I didn't pay that much attention to the game, you know, leading up to it. I knew about the classic XCOM, and I knew the game was coming out, but I didn't necessarily think that the new one was going to be any good. There wasn't a huge... I mean, there was a fair bit of advertising, but there wasn't really a massive hype train. And it came out and ended up being a fantastic game. I'm still playing now. I've got over 100 hours played. It's a really fun, really engaging experience. Other stuff that I really liked this year that was a little bit unexpected was, another example would be PlanetSide 2, which, well, actually, there are a lot of problems I have with PlanetSide 2. Well, overall, PlanetSide 2 actually did end up being a little bit disappointing to me. It's kind of, and that's the problem. That's what I'll get into. It's these games that I wanted to be excited about, and that have a lot going for them, but ended up just not quite doing it for me for a variety of reasons. I had a lot of fun with Star Wars: The Old Republic this year. Like, that came out late 2011 in the US, but it didn't release in Australia until early 2012, so I'm counting as a 2012 release, and you just have to deal with that. That was one of my favorite releases of 2012, and I mean, I don't like MMOs generally, just Titanic was a really fun experience for some really fucked up reasons, playing with a friend of mine, but you know, it's a cold day in hell when one of my favorite games of the year is Titanic. The new Counter-Strike was one of my favorite games that came out this year. You know, that's not a good sign, guys. That's bad. And I think what it comes down to is things this year that were supposed to be great and that people received very well weren't actually that good. And I think that in other years they would have been compared unfavorably to better games that had come out during that year, and the flaws with those games would have shown up more in reviews, whereas this year things were kind of dry. So games that maybe didn't deserve... were good games, don't get me wrong, but maybe didn't deserve as good of a critical reception as they got. Like, for me, there weren't any 9, 10 out of 10 games this year, and that's kind of bad. If there's no game that's really... No games, for that matter, they're really punching at that highest level. it's kind of depressing for me as somebody who plays video games, particularly when a lot of the things that came out this year that I was expecting to be amazing and hit that level and be the kind of thing that you want to be excited about ended up being so disappointing. So let's talk about some of those games and about why I didn't like 2012 for gaming. So early in the year we had Max Payne 3. I got my statue from the limited edition behind me there. It's a big stash. It's pretty cheaply made, but I'm glad I have it. Max Payne 3 was fantastically well received. It got great review scores. Strangely, it seemed to have a better critical reception than it did a popular reception, and that's something that makes sense to me. Max Payne 3 was a very polished, very well-made action game, but for me, as a fan of the franchise, when Remedy was making it, as a huge fan of Max Payne 1 and 2, I mean, some of my all-time favorite games, which is why I bought the Super Limited Ultra Collector's Edition of Max Payne 3, even though I had my doubts that the game would live up to that name, just to have the ball statue, because I love the franchise so much. Max Payne 3 was still disappointing, despite being a very competent game, because Max Payne 1 and 2 both hit it at a level where they're super classics. Like, I would recommend almost anybody, any gamer, to play those games. They're classics. They're amazing. You gotta experience them. And Max Payne 3, while a good game, didn't hit that for me. It felt like a competent action game, and it had a more focus on the story and atmosphere than a lot of action games, but it still wasn't quite the same as what we got in Max Payne 1 and 2. It still wasn't quite as good. So that was a little bit disappointing. On the subject of franchises that I love with sequels this year, where this year's release was a good game, but extremely disheartening for me as a fan of the franchise, we've got Hitman Absolution. Another good game, but as a fan of the Hitman franchise, it doesn't come close to Blood Money, which I'm looking at up on my shelf. I could get the box. No, I'm not going to. It doesn't come close to Blood Money. The only department where Absolution beats Blood Money is graphics. Otherwise, Blood Money destroy. I guess Absolution has better storytelling, but that's actually part of the problem. They focused on apologies, I'm still getting over a little bit of cough here. In Absolution, they focused on this cinematic storytelling kind of thing, and that wasn't what the franchise was about, and it's not what the franchise needed to be about. The games have always had storylines, but they were in the background. They weren't. You were there for the gameplay, for the cool assassinations and the complex levels. Absolution has nice graphics. It has a stronger focus on story, although I don't actually believe the storyline is that good. But they fucked up pretty badly. Like, the new disguise mechanic in Absolution on paper sounds like a good idea. It sounds more realistic than what we had in Blood Money, and maybe more interesting and more challenging. Unfortunately, in practice, it was not any of those things. It wasn't even more realistic. It was actually fucking bullshit the way it worked. And the main problem with the new disguise mechanic is that it wasn't fun at all, and it sapped a lot of the fun out of the game, in fact, because you spend a lot of time being forced to use this mechanic, a trademark mechanic of the franchise, that in Absolution is just a chore. It's a pain in the ass. It's not fun. So that sucked. And aside from that, the level design in Absolution is not awful, but the thing that they did where they segmented the levels into this linear progression of stages, that's not how Hitman should be. That's not how any of the previous games have been. And aside from that, none of the levels were quite up there with the complexity of levels like the Heaven and Hell Party and Blood Money, for example. The level design in Absolution was good for modern standards, but compared to other games in the franchise, it was atrocious. So Absolution, again, a solid and fun game. I know I'm not talking about the good things about these games right now, because that's not the focus. These are games that were well received and well reviewed, and I think if you pay attention to the gaming press and if you play them yourselves, you already know what is fun and good about these games. I'm trying to focus in this video on the aspects of them that were disappointing for me, and that made the year as a whole a disappointment because these big heavy-hitting blockbuster titles, none of them hit quite the right pitch. They didn't quite make it. They were all just a little bit not as good as they should have been, and that's really, really disappointing. So, there were some other games I want to talk about, too. PlanetSide 2, I mentioned earlier. I even mentioned that as being one of the games that I thought was a great unexpected surprise this year, and in one way it was, but the technical issues with the game, the balance issues with the game, the pricing, like the business model, the pricing of the weapons and unlocks and stuff, are three things that really break the experience. The one that's a really huge deal breaker for me is the technical side of things, where I can't run the game at a good frame rate, and that makes it, in particularly in a shooter, a relatively fast-moving shooter as well, it makes it impossible to get into the experience and enjoy it. It makes it almost impossible to even play the game well, because I get 15 to 20 FPS in any kind of anything bigger than a small skirmish, and of course the game is about those huge battles, so... And it's not like I have a crappy old PC either, and that's on low settings, so I'll turn the game way down. I'm running on maybe not the absolute latest, greatest of rigs, but my gaming PC is probably better than, 80% of people's gaming rigs out there. And it runs like crap. And with the other issues about balance and stuff, it's just not as much fun as it should be. It's a fantastic concept, and in many ways the execution went well, but it's also so fucked up in certain ways that make it so that I don't want to play it, and I almost can't. So that was bad. The Walking Dead, I think, was a contender for a lot of people as Game of the Year. The Walking Dead was a very good experience from a storytelling standpoint. I think people overblow how good the storyline was. I mean, people say like, "Oh my God, I was crying all through episode 4 and 5. I was so sad and fucking." No, I mean, okay, look, it was a good story. The characters were engaging. It wasn't that great, though. I mean, we're not talking some like amazing, emotional fucking roller coaster ride of hyper storytelling. It wasn't that good, guys. I mean, if some people got that out of it, sure. And compared to what we're used to in video games, the storytelling is absolutely top notch. I'm just saying it wasn't so godlike in terms of storytelling that you can just say that, nothing else needs to be in the game. And that was the problem that I had. I'm a fan of point-and-click adventure games, just to be clear. And I'm a fan of games that are heavy on dialogue as well, RPGs and stuff like that have a lot of dialogue. I like those kinds of games, but The Walking Dead had barely any gameplay. There were a few puzzles, but they were so simplistic that they barely qualified. I mean, certainly nothing even remotely comparable to older point-and-click adventure games. And don't get me wrong, adventure game logic is fucking retarded, and not every game needs to be that bastardly obtuse logically, that hard to solve, because it's just such a mindfuck what actually went through the developers' minds when they were designing the puzzle. I'm not saying that's what should have happened, but I feel that the Walking Dead game could just as easily have just been a graphic novel or a TV series, which, as you are probably aware, are things that we have. And it would have been just as effective. I don't feel that they used the fact that it was a game enough. I got bored for a lot of parts of it. The storyline was good, but there just wasn't enough for actual gameplay to really make it hit for me. I think you're starting to get the idea here. I think the other big one people pegged for their like hyper game of the year that they absolutely loved was Far Cry 3, which I also own, and I've played a fair bit of. Again, in this case I just don't get it. I think it's another shoot bang game. It's a generic single player first person shooter. It has an open world, but I mean it's not like. Why does it need to have, like, what, the sense of, I'm trying to explain this in a way that'll make sense to people, because a lot of people just have this profound love for open world playgrounds and stuff like that, but it's not always, it's not even that I think Far Cry was poorly served by that, actually. I don't think the fact that it had an open world was a problem at all. I think the problem was that the core gameplay was kind of fun, yeah, but, it's a first-person single-player shooter that doesn't have the benefit of a particularly good story. Most of the characters weren't very likable. The storyline at the beginning of the game, the first 10 minutes, really drew me in, and I thought, this is going to be a cool, atmospheric game. And then anyone who's played the game, and most of the reviews criticized it for not capitalizing on what seemed like a very strong setup. I'm not going to get into too much detail on this video because I don't want this to run too much longer. But so it's a single-player shooter where you don't have a benefit of a particularly strong story and characters. The multiplayer sucked, by the way. We're not going to talk about it. It was Call of Duty. It fucking sucked ass. That's not even a thing. People bought this game for the single player anyway, right? Mostly. So it was a single-player shooter. Didn't have the benefit of a good storyline. Didn't have the benefit of particularly impressive level design. It was mostly an open-world game, which did end up, in some sense, working against it because they didn't craft... There's nothing wrong with an open-world game, but you have to craft environments that create exciting gameplay experiences within that. You need tight level design inside your open world. So, for example, you need dungeons that are interesting and exciting and have a lot of sort of varied fun things about them if you're making an RPG. In a shooter, basically, you want to make sure the story missions, at the very least, take place in unique environments that offer unique sort of gameplay concerns. You need to have that. You need that kind of level design, or you're just kind of running across these jungle areas and then into these camps that kind of look all the same, and you're just kind of doing the same thing all the time, and the level isn't helping to make the gameplay interesting, and that was a problem I felt was with Far Cry 3. Not that it had an open world specifically, but that it didn't create enough interesting areas for gameplay to take place in that open world. So, no strong characters, no strong level design, not really even any particularly fun weapons or abilities. I mean, okay, so you had the crafting system where you could make those syringes to give you enhancements and stuff. That was mostly pointless. I think most people didn't use that very much. Maybe here and there, but you had some kind of cool abilities you could unlock with the leveling up system, the Tatao or whatever the fuck it was, but nothing like super, super cool and amazing and awesome. You had, like, the weapons were boring. You had a shitload of the generic assault rifles, shotguns, SMGs, and pistols like any other shooter. For some reason, attachments and camouflage, because you gotta appeal to the Call of Duty market in every game and have shiny fucking red dot sight, hyper fucking blanged out guns on your guy stranded on a remote fucking island who's not meant to know anything about fucking guns or anything. He's set up as this guy who doesn't know shit, but immediately becomes the most badass Special Forces commander in the history of anything. This pissed me off. Far Cry 2 was a very, very flawed, a deeply flawed game, but it had this soul and atmosphere that captured a lot of people, and I think a lot of people wanted to like the game more than they could. Far Cry 3, it's kind of like they killed what was good about Far Cry 2 and didn't improve substantially, really, on the things that were a problem in Far Cry 2. There's no more, you don't have that atmosphere of survival and of being like a stranger in a strange land and shit, and it seemed like they were trying to set that up at the beginning, and then they just didn't fucking do it. That pissed me off. That really upset me with Far Cry 3. I want it to be good, guys. I really did. I want it to be super exciting, but it fucked up. So that was weird. So the point is that you also don't have the benefit of any particularly interesting weapons or abilities. It's mostly kind of generic shit. You have the bow and you have the flamethrower, and that's a little bit more interesting, but not really. They didn't use the fire mechanic from Far Cry 2. I mean, it's sort of kind of, it wasn't as big a deal. It wasn't as effective. Far Cry 3, no, it was alright. It was a decent game, but it was just kind of bland. Dishonored was, this is, I swear to God, the last game I'm going to talk about here. I know this video is running too long now. Dishonored's the other one that I thought Dishonored was amazing initially. When I first started playing, I was like, yes, cool world, cool powers, reasonably cool weapons, mostly awesome setting, awesome powers, great concept for a game. The storyline was cut and dry. It took a little bit of back. It was fine. The storyline was fine. It served the gameplay. It wasn't amazing, but it was okay. And they didn't try and make it it was there, but they didn't try and shove it down your throat as like this main big cinematic thing. It was there to serve the gameplay as it should be. But Dishonored ended up being a little bit disappointing for me again because it ended too soon. I was really starting to get into it. I got a lot of the powers unlocked, so I was starting to have a lot of flexibility in how I could do things. And what I was ready for was for the game to start hitting me with really big, complex levels with a lot of shit going on. Levels that take 3 or 4 hours to complete, even if you do them quite rapidly. Big levels with a lot happening, where you use a lot of those powers and a lot of those different mechanics you've learned, and you can really be creative and break out of there. And they never quite hit that. The game just kind of ended. The most complex levels in the game are not that large or that complicated, and I felt like it was a waste. You know, they had these mechanics that were interesting, and then they didn't quite do enough with them, I felt. And that was a problem that plagued other games this year, too. There was Quantum Conundrum, which you guys, I streamed, you might have seen, possibly. Kind of a Portal-style first-person puzzle game where they had these mechanics to do with shifting between different dimensions with strange properties, and that game actually felt like you finished the tutorial and it ended. Like you had only just recently unlocked the abilities to do everything, and they'd introduced all the gameplay concepts, it felt like, and then it was over. Like they were done. There wasn't... So that was not really a major deal, just another example of the same thing happening, where the game designers set up these legitimately interesting mechanics and then didn't capitalize on that, didn't make enough use of those. And that was my problem with Dishonored, and why, again, I'd only ultimately put it as like an 8 out of 10, not the 9 or 10 out of 10 that it had the potential to be. And you'll recall in 2011, it was completely different to this. This is why this year was a disappointment to me. If you think about the games that were my favorite in 2011, we had Deus Ex Human Revolution, which was a revival of one of my favorite all-time games, probably my favorite game of all time, Deus Ex, and Human Revolution was fantastic. It was great. It was long enough. It had interesting levels. It had cool powers. It had a reasonable storyline. Reasonable. It had some flaws, but overall, I felt like it lived up to its legacy. I really did, and that was a hard thing to say, whereas Max Payne 3 and Hitman Absolution were slaps in the face as fans of the franchise, and Max Payne 3 to a lesser extent, but to an extent. We had L.A. Noire, which was an adventure game based on conversation and problem-solving and the storyline that was also innovative. And I felt hit harder with its story than The Walking Dead did. I felt it had more interesting puzzles and stuff, and it made the conversations more an element of the gameplay with their lie detection mechanic and that kind of thing. L.A. Noire was a really good example of the adventure game genre that was interesting and new and exciting and had great storytelling and all that stuff. L.A. Noire was dope as fuck. We had some great RPGs. We had like The Witcher 2 and we had Dark Souls, and I love those games. We had Skyrim, which isn't my thing, but I can appreciate most. It's a good terrain simulator. This year we had for RPGs, well, we had like Diablo 3, and we had Torchlight 2, which was like Diablo 3, but a little bit better. I'm trying to think. I didn't play Dragon's Dogma. Maybe that was pretty good. Did that even... Or was that last... No, I'm pretty sure that came out this year. Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition came out. That just... No, but that was 2013. I mean, there was Mass Effect 3. I didn't play it because I thought the franchise was done after ME2, and the reaction to Mass Effect 3 tells me that I probably didn't need to play it. I think you guys get what I'm saying here. 2011 was a good year with good games. It's not... Because I was worried when I started feeling tired of gaming and not like I was enjoying any of this crap that was coming out this year, that there was something wrong with me and I just didn't like games anymore. When I thought about it, I realized that the problem was the games this year that should have been those amazing 9, 10 out of 10 level experiences that I'd want to honor in a top 5 games of the year list that just blew me away and made me really happy to be a gamer, they didn't live up to that in 2012. Those games that should have done that, they fucked out. Whereas in 2011 and earlier years, most of the time, you had at least 3 or 4 titles that really did hit at that top level. 2012, I mean, I like XCOM Enemy Unknown a lot, but even that's got, you know, a swath of technical issues. It is flawed. I said I like CSGO, but CSGO is a small game and very changing thing from CS Source, and CSGO is just what I was expecting it to be. It's not that amazing. We had, you know, some nice indie titles, but again, they were kind of these small, fun, short, one-off experiences. Nothing really epic and hugely engrossing. The big shooters this year, PlanetSide 2 was kind of the best big multiplayer shooter we got. That and CSGO, although CSGO isn't big. It's a small game, as I said. The big multiplayer shooter releases of this year from AAA companies were Medal of Honor Warfighter and Black Ops 2. You guys know from my chair review how I felt about Black Ops 2. I didn't like it. And Medal of Honor Warfighter I was a bit more generous to in terms of how I felt about the gameplay. And I think I was kind of one of the few people who liked that game as much as I did, because I thought it was decently executed. I didn't think it was amazing, but I thought it was pretty good. But it didn't really end up having much staying power. You know, it didn't compete. There's no way it could have compared to BF3 or to the COD franchise when the COD franchise wasn't as tired as it is now. So the shooter franchise was crap, whereas 2011, as BF3 was in there. So for me, you know, all genres, in all respects, I mean, what good strategy games did XCOM? We got a good strategy game, but not a good large-scale strategy game. Endless Space was nice. Not many of you played it, though. So again, not really hitting up there with the Super AAA's things. It was just a disappointing year, I think, no matter what genre you were a fan of. 2012, nothing really hit, you know, that peak, and that's sad. I'm just hoping 2013 is going to be a better and more exciting year, because I love gaming, guys, and I don't want it to be this way. I'll be still here making videos talking about the games that I think are awesome, the games that I think are suck. The games that I think are suck. Also, I'll be talking about. So I'll be around nonetheless. I'm just hoping there will be more causes for me to be really happy about games going forward in 2013. Anyway, let me know what you thought of 2012. Let me know if you think I'm being too much of an asshole here. I mean, I expect a lot of you probably do, but that was my opinion on the year that was. Let me know what you guys thought and what you thought of the video. And until next time, Triple T Cat out.